right, good morning. How you feeling today? Thumbs up, one or two? Two, give me two. Come on, give me two. There you go, that's better. All right, coffee in your hand, perfect. All right, so this is not gonna necessarily be a traditional kind of keynote. Basically, you're in class right now. So I'm gonna treat it like a graduate class. So there'll be some activities, you got some handouts, there'll be some interactive things, a few little videos. So there won't necessarily be a big chunk of time at the end for questions, but I'm gonna hang out after. I'll be here all morning. And also, I'm in your network now. You can contact me anytime, and I'll do my best to get back to you, and we can schedule a Skype call or continue the dialogue if you want. So given that I have a limited amount of time with you, I want to show you as much as I can, but also want to stimulate and kind of provoke you in terms of a few key topics, all right? So here's where we'll go. So this is the outline for where we're going to go in the next, say, 75 to 90 minutes. Really want to get to, the bulk of this will be what is good coaching? What do we know about good coaching or quality coaching? But after speaking with John, I thought it might be good to have a little primer, kind of a warm-up in a sense, on talent development, because good coaching is about building talent and developing talent. So let's take a few minutes just to look at talent development. What do we know about talent development, and especially working with youth populations? And I kind of jumped right into this. Just want to thank you for your time and having me out here. I was here yesterday. It seems like a really great group of people, and congratulations to all the people who won the awards yesterday. So let's take a look at the first one. Well, actually, just to set the stage a little bit, I used to just jump into my sessions, and I was doing a tour across New Zealand a little while ago, and after the first one, they said, you got to kind of take a moment to introduce yourself, let people know the context of the information you're going to share with people. I said, okay. So this is pretty much a typical day for me. I'm a professor in a kinesiology department. I'm from Canada originally, grew up playing ice hockey, and ended up at UCLA, worked there for a little bit, and then now at Fresno State. But also along the way, I've always just been really curious about performance. So I have a background in physical education, psychology, learning, talent development. So I kind of eclectic kind of background, but the common thread is performance, teaching, learning, and performance. And so now on any given day, I'll be doing research, I'll be teaching a grad class, I'll be out at a gym or a pool with our coaches and high school coaches, run to a practice to coach, because I also coach at the moment. I'm coaching ice hockey, and then be on a phone with a national team coach. So for me, I'm trying to kind of work in that gap between science and practice. It has to be applied science, and it has to be meaningful and relevant for coaches. And having coached, I know how hard it is to do these things. It's easy to say, oh yeah, just go through these steps, and then you got real people on the other side of that. It's really, really hard. So what have we learned? And it's also kind of taken me to some really interesting places. So I want to share with you some of the lessons I've learned from being around really neat people in performance domains. And just in the last few months, these are some of the adventures I've been on. World champion rugby team in Melbourne, Australia. WWE, of all things. They asked me to come and spend 5 days with them and look at how they coach, because it's pretty standard across all sports. Former athlete becomes a coach. Well, how do they learn to coach? Who coaches coaches, right? So there's kind of an awakening to this. We need to invest in our coaches development. And then one of the best coaches in the world, if you ever get a chance to see him or hear him, the golf coach on the end there, on your right, he's Jordan Spieth's coach, and he also coached the #1 woman in the world, a guy named Cameron McCormick. And he has a podcast that he just started a little while ago called Earn Your Edge. And it's free, and he is brilliant. He's really a phenomenal coach. So when I'm around people like this, they're asking me to come and give them advice, but honestly, I'm the one learning. I'm just trying to soak up as much as I can from what these people do and look across all these examples to see what are the common principles. But also, as Drew mentioned, I've been introduced to water polo just in the last few years. Growing up in Canada, in northern Canada, never saw a pool or water polo. But living in Central California now, and my daughter really took up water polo the last few years ago. And so I'm around water polo a lot and observing a lot. And then also very fortunate to have had Natalie Benson land in Fresno, of all places. Phenomenal person, phenomenal coach, and we work a lot together and kind of building team culture and teaching and learning. So I'm really fortunate to be around the sport now. But what I want you to focus on, so I'm going to show you examples from research, from different sports, and I don't want you to get bogged down in the practices. I want you to focus on the principles. And you've all heard that term, best practices. What are best practices? Really, there are no best practices. There's a best practice for that moment, that athlete, that coach, that club. But what the best coaches do is they look, they observe at all these practices across sports and those disciplines, but then they step back. So it's like the moonshot here. Step back and say, okay, why does that work for that coach or for that club? You know, what the All Blacks do, why does it work for them? So it's not taking a practice and putting it into my environment. It's looking at the practices, stepping back and say, what's the principle behind the practice? And that's really what I want you to think about today. And we'll have activities for you to kind of stimulate that. What's the principle? So think best principles instead of best practices. So let's get going on the talent development primer. So developing talent is where it all starts, right? And this is my son. No, I'm just kidding. But well, my kids are my guinea pigs, I must admit. As I've learned and traveled all over the world about talent development and spending time with great researchers and great coaches, I always come home and say, honey, I think we should change the garage. let's put something in there. So I'm always experimenting. But this is kind of the model that we see ingrained in our culture and around the world, to be honest with you, is let's get them going early. And earlier the better. And I think a lot of it originates from the models that we see in our environment, and we pick out we kind of shine the spotlight on the outliers, right? And so these are just a couple examples, but we see the stories of the Tiger Woods or Serena, or pick whoever you want, and we see them starting at a very young age and having a very specific kind of environment where they're kind of trained from a very young age. And I remember a story about Andre Agassi, made $100 million, was #1 in the world. And his father, when he was a baby, when he was young, would tape ping pong paddles to his hands. So he got used to, when he's hitting things and knocking stuff over, he's getting used to having a paddle or an implement in his hand. So we see those examples and think, well, that's how you do it, right? Because look at the end result. They made it. And I love these. This really hit home for me when I remember the Olympics a few years back. TD Ameritrade had a series of commercials that really reinforced this idea of what I call reverse engineering. So you look, okay, Olympic gold medal or scholarship or whatever it might be, and then you reverse engineer that outcome. So let's hit that video right there.
Oh my goodness, Louis Vito.
TD Ameritrade, helping you reach your long-term goals one small step at a time.
So there's this reinforcement in our culture that it's this tidy linear path, right? Get the little kid on the snowboard and you just see all the little steps, like a recipe, right? Oh, you end up with an Olympic champion. There you go. So I want to get you thinking a little bit more about this. You have in your handouts on that first page, you have a talent development, or what we call talent IQ quiz. There's more questions, but I just pulled off the top 10. And I'd like to give you a few minutes and you do this together, and then I'll show you the answers. Let's see how much you know about developing talent in terms of what the science tells us works. All right? Do it together. Your next level certification depends on this, by the way. John will be collecting them. Okay, let's bring it back in. If you're not finished, that's fine, because I'm going to give you a little bit more time to reflect on that. Just walking around, I think it's mission accomplished because it's less about the answers and more about the conversations that are happening right now and hearing lots of, well, it depends, and great. It's messy, isn't it? It's hard, it's complicated, but let's look at what we know about from a scientific perspective about that and use that as a guide, not an answer, but more as a guide. So I will show you the answers in a minute, but just again, to kind of put it in context, the world we live in right now, at least in North America, which is quite unique in terms of youth sport. I mean, there's a lot of media attention on this right now. The pay-for-play water polo is an expensive sport too at times. And so we're in a unique moment where sport for kids has really become a job in a lot of cases. And I challenge you to ask yourself, have you ever heard a kid say, hey, I can't wait to work water polo? Hey, mom, dad, water polo season's coming up. Can you sign me up to work water polo? Like, they want to play, right? That's the language that they use, and that's how they think. And we've kind of turned it into a job across sports, unfortunately. And I think we're losing sight of why they're there in the first place. And so there's lots of information on that right now. And I encourage you to look for this video called Cost of Winning. It's going to be released next week, I think. It's a documentary, and it's about 25 minutes long. And it really kind of shines a light on the environment that we're working in right now. And it's around the world. They have some good examples there. And it'd be the kind of video that would be kind of fun to show at a initial meeting with parents or something, just to kind of put it in context, or even do activities like this. You know, why do we have water polo for kids? What are we really trying to achieve here? And again, we see some of these statistics. We're losing kids, and pretty much all sports, although there are a few sports that are growing. Ice hockey, for example, is growing. Rugby sevens, rugby's growing. You know, in the Olympics, next Olympics, they're adding surfing and skateboarding and things like that. So it's always going to be evolving. But water polo, you have competition for kids. And so how can we make sure we're making it a good environment so kids want to come back? In a sense, they're our customers, right? So I'm going to show you this. I like this little picture here. Now, these are 7-year-old kids. Now, do you think any kid at 7 had this picture in mind when they were thinking about playing hockey with their friends, right? But again, this is the idea of we turned it into a job, and we're working them, and they don't want a job. They want to play with their friends. And I'm not saying there's not a place for training, right? And every kid's different in terms of development and what they're able to handle. But just to be sensitive to what we're really doing here, kind of step back. And so you can look at your notes, and then I'll show you the answers, but I'm going to show you this little video here. In Canada, Sport Nova Scotia actually has invested a lot in trying to raise awareness over some of these issues. And so let's watch this little video here.
Oh, I see a lot of new faces here. Who wants to go first?
Hi, I'm Jill. I'm a recovering soccer mom.
Hi, Jill.
Ever since Bailey was 5, I've been driving her to early morning practices, after school games, weekend tournaments, summer camps, indoor winter league, Spratum league.
Spratum?
Spring/autumn. I lived in my van, never saw my husband, but it was okay because my sacrifice was making Bailey a better player.
But we encourage our kids to play sports so they become better people.
Tell that to the little brats, huh? Who play other sports during the rest of the year and then steal all the spots on the soccer team?
Perhaps those kids are better athletes because they play other sports?
That makes no sense. Bailey is out there every day, kicking the ball until her feet are numb.
You say that like it's a good thing.
And then one day, out of nowhere, Bailey tells me that she doesn't want to play soccer anymore. She can't even look at a soccer ball after all the years I put in.
How old is Bailey now?
Going on 7, why?
When a child plays only one sport, sometimes they have a higher risk of suffering repetitive injuries. They can burn out, and they get turned off sports altogether.
I found myself at 5 o'clock in the morning the other day, sitting in the van, and I realized I'm not a soccer mom anymore.
Encourage Bailey to try different sports.
So I shouldn't have sold the van.
All right, would anyone else like to share?
Hi, I'm Todd.
Hi, Todd.
I bet the farm on my son playing in the NBA. Literally, I took out a second mortgage on the family farm to pay for basketball camps. Things were looking great for a while. Justin made varsity in middle school, but then
Did he get injured?
worse. He stopped growing. He's 5'5". Genetics is a cruel mistress. I can't even look my own son in the eye now, and it's not because he's so darn little.
Is it because you're going to lose the farm?
No, because he's playing on the JV team.
But is he having fun?
I never asked.
Maybe you should, Todd.
We're with you, Todd. As a parent, you just want to see your child succeed.
Our Daniel could have played in the NHL. He went to all the day camps, straight into night camp, hockey school, hockey.
Hockey?
Twice the hockey and no school.
We thought he was the next Wayne Gretzky. He wasn't even the next Brent Gretzky. Hasn't been on skates in 15 years.
Early sports specialization can actually hurt a child's overall athletic development. And by encouraging their son to only play hockey, they may have actually hurt his chances for succeeding. But what is Daniel doing now?
David doesn't like to speak about it.
It might help to share.
My son is an astronaut. I still have all his hockey gear.
He still keeps his skates sharpened.
He's still draft eligible.
He's 34 years old.
Gordie Howe played until he's 50.
You need to get over it.
I know.
Admitting it is the first step. How about you? Would you like to share?
I'm Wade. I'm only here because my son made me.
And why is that?
He says I'm trying to live vicariously through him.
Is that true? Right. Well, let's all remember why we encourage our kids to play sports.
To win.
To be a star.
To get rich.
We encourage our kids to play sports so they can have fun and socialize and learn to be part of a team. Is forcing our child to play only one sport and then putting a whole lot of pressure on them to succeed a really healthy thing to do?
No.
Good. Repeat after me. Kids who play more than one sport get more out of sports.
Kids who play more than one sport get more out of sports.
So there's, again, this is the type of video you could show at a parent meeting, or just, it's funny, it's silly, but there's evidence behind it, and it kind of shines a light on some of the craziness that we don't see when we're in it, right? And we're all living this, and I have kids 11 and 14, and I got a van, and I'm driving all over the place, and I'm doing it too, but can we do it in the right way? So let's take a look at the answers, compare that to what you wrote down, and see how you did. I'm not going to call anybody out, and if this were really a class, I'd probably take half an hour or 40 minutes, and we'd go through all those and have a discussion. Why are those the answers, in a sense? And maybe there's some that we can challenge, right? But if you want to see, if you go Google Sport IQ Test, Sport Nova Scotia, you'll see, I think there's 13 questions in total. And when you click on when you take the test and you click on an answer, a dialog box pops open, and it has why that's the answer. So the answer is true because there's research showing that in a little paragraph. So again, that might be a fun thing to have parents do. Say, hey, you know what? Go to this link and try, or do it together at a meeting, and then you have, again, it's less about the answers and more about the conversations that come out of it. Oh, okay, I never really thought about it. Okay, I see that, but we could do it this way. And so it's a way to stimulate those conversations. And I'll be here all day if you do want to talk about any of those questions. Because there's one question about moving a kid up to play with older kids, and there is some good research, like small towns, there's an overrepresentation of elite athletes from small towns, and we've seen that in studies in New Zealand and Canada and the US. And one of the reasons is there's one gym, one pool, one soccer pitch, whatever it might be, so kids have to play cross age. So 9-year-olds are playing with 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds. And there's definitely some benefits to that, but the reason that they said that question's false is the number one reason kids play sports is to be with their friends. They want to play with their friends. So if I'm moving them up to another team, all of a sudden I'm taking away the number one reason they're here in the first place. Now I'm not with my friends anymore. So something to consider. All right, so let's look at what we know about good coaching and how we can nurture talent and talent development. And you have another handout. If you flip the page, it's a pyramid. And when I worked at UCLA, I was very fortunate to cross paths with John Wooden, and widely regarded as one of the best coaches of all time. His influence is everywhere I go around the world. His influence is still there. And it wasn't necessarily because he won a lot of championships, I think. And it's really the legacy he left behind. Like, he wrote about it. He shared his wisdom very openly. And also he was very much a teacher. And so when we were, after I left, a group of us thought, you know, Wooden's pyramid of success, his pyramid of success that took him many decades to complete, was really for the learner, for building blocks for the performer. And we thought, wouldn't it be neat if you could take Wooden's pyramid of success and turn it over, and the backside is a complementary pyramid for the building blocks of a great coach. So one side, building blocks of a great performer, other side, building blocks of a great coach. So this wasn't a scientific study, but a group of us, including Swen Nader, who won 2 championships playing for him and played in the NBA for 10 years, and very, very close as coach, and a guy named Ron Gallimore, who did the very first study in coaching science on John Wooden in 1974. And coach. And so we would bounce these ideas back and forth and get feedback. And this is what it looks like. You have a picture of it. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but there's just a little exercise I'd like to do here and then kind of bring it full circle. So if you look across, well, first of all, Wooden chose a pyramid because it's the strongest, structurally it's the strongest type of building you can create. So he wanted something very strong. And the cornerstones are the key to the pyramid. So those words are there for a very specific reason: love and balance. And he always felt that love was the most important word in the English language. And I remember when we were trying to get this published, because I wanted it to be on record, it got rejected 3 times because the scientific editors always came back and said, you can't use the word love. You can't say great coaching starts with love. And I said, okay, let's just pick a synonym. I don't know, it's just a word, right? And Coach Wooden and Swen Nader said, if you take the word love out, take our names off it, and we want nothing to do with it. So I was stuck in the middle, but so I tried to treat it like a law case. I went out and got all the evidence I could from great coaches, and it always came back to love. It always starts with love. And sure enough, a guy named Eddie Robinson, who was at one point the all-time winningest football coach in college football, if you read his biography, his autobiography, the first line in his autobiography is, coaching is about love. So I had all these examples of great coaches talking about love. I said, it's love, take it or leave it. And we were able to get it published that way. But look at how love is defined. Love is defined as acting in the best interests of the athlete. And the reason that it was controversial is because you see all the scandals that we have, and USA Gymnastics is going through it again right now. And so it's kind of politically incorrect to use that word and talk about loving your athletes. But the way we define it is acting in the best interest of your athletes. So when you discipline an athlete, that's showing love. When you go out and you attend a clinic, you're showing love, right? So it's doing things that are in the best interest of the athlete. It's not about making them feel good about themselves and self-esteem and things like that. It's really about doing what needs to be done to help make them a better person and a better athlete. So if you look across the bottom row, what's the common theme there? So great coaching starts with what? What would you say? What's that all about? It's about other people. It's about relationships, right? Connecting with other people. So great coaching starts with connecting with people. And the reason I'm going to do this with you, at the same time I was doing this project, I was involved in a talent development study on great coaching. And so I had these 2 parallel projects going on. And then when I was finished, I overlaid them and said, oh man, these things completely line up. So that the great coaching really starts with what we call interpersonal knowledge. Great coaches have very strong interpersonal knowledge. You might call that emotional intelligence, relationship skills, but you're coaching people, not water polo, right? First, you're coaching people, not water polo. And so great coaches understand how to connect with people. And your palette happens to be water polo or soccer or tennis or whatever it might be, right? Then we move up. What's the common theme here? What's the second row all about? What would you say there? So first row is about connecting with other people. Second row is about you taking initiative. The word that comes to mind for me now is pride. If you have pride in your craft, You don't wait for someone to mandate that you have to read a book, listen to a podcast, go to a clinic, go watch a coach of another sport, run a practice. If you really have pride in what you do, you take initiative to do those things. So we actually, in the research, that's referred to as intrapersonal knowledge. So knowledge of yourself. What do I need to do to keep getting better as a coach? And then acting on that. And then the heart of the pyramid, what's this all about? Well, now we get to water polo. Now we get to technique, tactics, strategy, rules, traditions, culture. And this is important. We call this professional knowledge in the literature, knowledge of your profession. And this is important because historically, this is where we started. Up until maybe 10 years ago, to be honest with you, in terms of coach development and coach education and coaching certifications, we started at the center of the pyramid. You come to a level 1 or a clinic, and it's water polo. Great, but hold on a second. Aren't there people on the other side of that? Don't worry about them. That's fine. We're going to run these drills, right? So it's forced us to reflect back, say people first, yourself, taking pride in what you do, and then learn about your profession. And a simple way to think about it is know your people, know yourself, know your sport. That's what great coaches do, and they invest heavily in doing that. And then, so if I'm doing that, what's the outcome? What's the target? What am I trying to achieve if I'm living this? And at the top of this, you see the apex is teacher, and you notice that the title of this pyramid is the pyramid of teaching success in sports, not the pyramid of coaching. So it's very much about teaching people. And what are we trying to teach them? We're trying to teach them what we refer to as the 4 C's. And when we look across youth development literature, great programs, whether it's Boy Scouts or soccer, water polo, it doesn't matter what it is, great programs for talent development, for youth development, develop these 4 things. Competence, and we call them the 4 C's. Competence, confidence, connection, and character. And again, traditionally, we just focus on the competence, better water polo player. But the All Blacks, for example, widely regarded as one of the best sporting clubs and teams in the world, their mantra is better people make better All Blacks. And they fall and they stumble, but that's really what they try and live. And it's the same thing here. We want better people make better water polo players, which means I got to invest in that. And I have to do things in practice. And part of my coaching is building people. That has to be explicit. And the thing with confidence, really what we're talking about there is more like mental toughness, resilience, grit, whatever term you want to use. It's not self-esteem and making people feel good about themselves. It's building resilient people. So when they lose, they come back. When they have a tough practice, they come back. That's really what we want to build. All right, so we had a little primer here to kind of get us going. Somebody told me I should put a picture of this guy up. He said he's a good coach. I figured, okay, I'll put him up there. What the heck? So we want to see what do we know about great coaching from a scientific and practical perspective. So we're going to dive into this right here, and we'll have a few little activities too. So when I wrote this book, I was asked to write the book, and my goal was to kind of make it a bridge book in a sense. So historically, we have, if you want to learn about coaching, we have biographies, autobiographies, newsletters, fantastic, right? Stories. And then we have a whole 40 years of science on coaching, textbooks and journals, but very seldom do people interact in those 2 worlds, right? And so I wanted to kind of pull from both. What do we know about the science and what do we know from great coaches, and can we put it in one place? And then we organize it around moments. So all coaches go through these moments. You have a preseason, an in-season, an end of season, an off-season, and then you repeat. So to me, what I've seen is great coaches are really good at navigating the moments. Great coaching happens in moments, all these little moments. So what do we know about what works in these different moments? So I'm going to go through each one, and what we're going to do, I just pulled out a couple of key themes. I'll share a few stories, some examples, and again, you'll have a PDF of this, so don't worry about writing things down. If you see a reference or something you want, you'll get it. And then we'll pause. So it's like 8 minutes. Just listen, observe, and then we'll pause, and I'm going to give you some prompts, and you talk with some people around you about these prompts, and then we come back. So we're going to kind of move in and out. So for me, 3 big things when you get a team, when you start a team, that we need to attend to are purpose, values, and standards. And I like this picture. This is not too far from where I live. This is Yosemite National Park. And I got this quote out of a book called The Rise of Superman, a really neat book. And it's by this world-class climber. When someone asked him, why do you do that? Why would you do crazy things like that? He said, I certainly don't climb rocks to get on top of rocks. And it really hit me, you know, if you have the best people in sport and in different disciplines have a very clear sense of why they do what they do, you know, why they get out of bed in the morning. It's clarity of purpose. And if you have that across a whole team, you have something really special. And I always use this example when I was in Ireland, for example, going across all these professional rugby clubs. Some have been around for 120, 130 years. I said, ask yourself, do you think a group of people got together in 1878 and sitting in a pub or in a room somewhere saying, we need to form a rugby club because we want to put trophies in a trophy case? No, I mean, that's great, but that's not why. That's not why you do what you do. That can't be it. And I always come back to this, and some of you may have seen this. This is a great example. I like this book, and coaches seem to enjoy this book too, of understanding the importance of starting with why, not what. So the what is water polo, right? The why is what gets us out of bed in the morning. Why do you care about water polo? You live in a free democratic society. You could care about a lot of stuff. So why are you so passionate about water polo? And how can I create an environment where that's contagious for other people who come into that environment, right? And one of my favorite examples of that is this guy here, Bob Ladouceur, who was the coach, high school football coach here in California, De La Salle, and has the longest winning, so you could argue the most successful high school football coach of all time. And if you know his story a little bit, Disney made a movie about him. And you see here, they actually wrote a book called When the Game Stands Tall, another great book about coaching. And Disney made a movie about him. And if you were to map his coaching purpose over this golden circle, Simon Sinek calls it the golden circle, you can see here his why. He would tell you, so the winningest coach of all time coaches not because he wanted to get a winning streak and a bunch of trophies, because he felt a calling to serve and build young people. Football just happened to be his palette. That's great. And then you see the how and the what. The what is the result, right? So we would want to do the same thing for us. And so you start with your why, and then you build values and standards around your purpose. So you want alignment in what you do. And again, this is kind of the model. It's always a work in progress. And the values are kind of what really matter to us, and the standards are what that looks like in everyday action. And I did something with badminton a while ago, and they've started to brand this idea of these are our values around the world in this particular sport. And Jill Ellis is a great example of that, former UCLA coach and our women's national team coach for soccer. If you speak with her, she'll tell you, you coach people first, sport second. It's all about people. So she gets that bottom line of that pyramid. It's about people, building people through soccer. That's kind of her purpose. Very successful, obviously. And then to see the standards. So it's one thing to understand your why, and it's one thing to have a sense of values, but the standards are putting it in action. This is what it looks like, okay? These are the values and the purpose in action. And a great example of that, this is another one of my favorite books. If you haven't seen this one, it's called The Gold Standard. And why I like this book so much is it's a book of moments. It's not a biography. It's not a basketball book. It's a book of moments. So when this coach, one of our greatest coaches right now, took over our national team, it was in a state of disarray. And he walks you through what I did my first team meeting, what I did my first practice, what I did my first trip overseas, what I did at first World Championships. So it's all how he navigated all these moments. And you talk about standards, and one of the first things he did is get together with his team. It's actually the first thing he did. He got together with his team, and they identified how we're going to act around here. What are the standards that are going to guide how we act as a basketball team? And this was a team that had the best players in the world and had lost to Puerto Rico, finished fourth in the Olympics, and they lost their way. They didn't really know why they were playing, and they didn't have clear standards and values. And this is just a snapshot of some of them. And that picture in the bottom corner is on his desk. I know a guy who works with him, and he took a picture. This is on his desk of all the values and the standards signed by all the players on that team, LeBron and Kobe Bryant and people like that. And I'm not, again, this isn't the answer, but the principle is there. Have a clear sense of your values and your standards, and then put them in observable behaviors. So if we talk, yeah, we value integrity. Well, what does integrity mean to a 12-year-old, to a 20-year-old? I don't know what that means. When you do that, that's integrity. So you put it in observable behaviors. And I know a lot of coaches like rules. So often at our first team meeting, we'll hand out all the team rules. And the more I'm around great coaches, they don't really care about rules. We don't really have rules, but we have standards. We have lots of standards, and then we create environments where those are expected norms. That's how we act around here. And I'm not here to babysit and police. I know it's different with, with younger kids. Maybe you do need to have rules and you do need to police things a bit more, but I like that example, and that was with the Golden State Warriors. And it really, some other places where this hit me recently, one is with, you see here a coach, his name's Steve Hansen. He's the coach of the All Blacks rugby team. And there's some neat videos online if you wanted to see this. Whenever one of the All Blacks, one of their core values is humility. And having spent time around them and in New Zealand, that's really part of being a Kiwi. That's part of who they are as a people. So it's kind of embedded in who they are, but it's also part of the All Blacks culture. And so you need to see that. So if humility is one of your values, if I spend a day with you or at your club or on the deck, I should see it. I should see it in action. And one way you see it with them is every time they show up at a train station, an airport, wherever, and they're loading and unloading gear, first of all, it's the team that loads and unloads the gear. And the the head coach is the first person in the back of the bus loading or unloading gear. So, I don't know, Adam, how often you would do that, but you think of pro sports, right? Would you see, Steve Kerr, with his back, probably not, but you think about, Steph Curry unloading a bus and things like that. If it's really important to our culture, then we need to act on it. We need to model that. And the other one I put up there was a neat study that came out a little while ago about the impact of values, observable actions and values and standards on behaviors and culture, and it was with teachers. And there was this neat study where they had teachers, elementary school teachers, shake hands of kids walking into the classroom, and other teachers didn't. So it's just, hey, how you doing today? Welcome to class, Sarah. It costs nothing, right? 2 minutes. And teachers who did that little interaction at the door, they had 20% drop in discipline issues and about an 8 to 10% increase in performance with their kids. And the reason I think stuff like that works is it's values and standards in action. So you're kind of spreading your values like a virus. And I wrote a little commentary about this recently because it really hit me. A lot of coaches talk about buy-in. Like, I'm trying to get my athletes to buy in. I don't understand why they don't buy into the culture. You're not trying to sell, you don't sell a team culture. You infect people with your team culture. And it's the same way a virus spreads. If you want someone to catch the flu, you sneeze on them, right? Or you sneeze on the door handles, you infect your environment. So you need to infect your environment with everyday little behaviors, and it becomes contagious. This is what I've seen. And there's some neat research behind that. Last point, then I want you to talk this out for a minute. I spent some time with Anson Dorrance, and he's extreme in terms of how he enacts values and standards because he measures everything. So everything you do in practice is measured. And he picked that up from Dean Smith, who was the basketball coach, Michael Jordan's coach. And other coaches have adapted that. So again, it's not the practice, but the principle. And I like what he told me this. He said, listen, people do what you inspect, not what you expect. And that's always kind of stuck with me. And we can have values and standards and put them on T-shirts and hand them out to parents. But unless I'm inspecting these things and living them, it's just a hope. Geez, I hope they do it, right? So I want you to take a minute here. I'm gonna skip this one, given the time we're at. But I'm gonna give you, say, 3 minutes, and I want you with some people around you to talk about these prompts. So is everyone, or if I went to your club, would it be does everyone really understand our purpose, why we have this club? Would I see the values in action, and do we inspect them and reward them? So this is a little reflection for you. I'll give you 3 minutes on this one, then we'll pick up again. So we're not going to finish any conversation, but I hope that we get to start a lot of conversations. And these types of prompts, I encourage you to use these types of prompts at your clubs, have these kinds of conversations. I'm part of a hockey club right now, and these are the kinds of conversations I'm pushing people to have. What's our purpose? What are our values? Will we see it? If we spend time with each other, will we see these things in action? So again, it's not the practice, but the principles. These are the principles. So let's move ahead to in season. And so we got a team. We're kind of building our values and our standards. And now we're coaching. Now this is the heart of it. Practices and games. This is where we're at. So what do we know about what great coaches do in that moment? And when I work with coaches, I spend a lot of time in the preseason, end of season, off season, and in season, basically get out of the way. Go coach, and we'll have little touches, but just go do your craft, and let's reflect on it. So 3 things that I think are really important that I've seen are understanding how people learn. So again, if the essence of what we do is teaching, we need to understand what learning is and how that works, and how to create the right kind of climate so that people want to come back and do hard things. We're asking them to do hard things. And then really the essence of where we spend the bulk of our time is in practices. So what does a good practice look like? What do we know about that? There we go. Okay. So we know that the essence of great coaching is teaching. And a while ago, I was being interviewed, and they said, well, you know what the word coach means, right? And I said, yeah, someone who coaches. And they said, no, like really the root of the word. And I said, I don't know. I never really thought about it. And they went on to explain what it means. And so the root, the origin of the word coach is in teaching. And there's different versions of it, but you go back a few hundred years, and in Europe, when people would travel in horse and carriage, aristocrats in particular, they would bring their children with them on these extended trips, and they would bring a tutor, someone to teach them while they're on these long trips. And that tutor, the person teaching the kids, over time just became known as a coach, because they traveled in the coach teaching the kids. So by definition, we're teachers. So we need to think like teachers and think about what great teachers do. So I'm going to give you a minute here to reinforce this. And again, if we had more time for doing a workshop, I'd actually get you to do this and teach each other how to juggle. But just with some people around you, I'll give you 1 minute. You're charged with teaching someone how to juggle. Where do you start? Like, what are the steps in teaching someone how to juggle? I'll give you a minute and just talk it out, and then I'll show you. Okay? Okay, just out of curiosity, someone maybe up here at the front is willing to share. What's the first thing? Actually, I'll call on John. What's the first thing we do? So you're going to teach someone. I come to you and say, I hear you're a renowned juggler, circus freak. Okay? So you say, okay, I'll teach you how to juggle. What's the first thing you're going to do with me? I think we agree that. So you're going to show me what juggling looks like. So you're going to give me a picture. Demonstration. Not bad, not bad. Wrong. Anybody else got an idea? Okay. Oh, interesting. We're getting deep now. Yeah. 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 Interesting. Why? Start with why. Like, well, yeah, why do you want to learn this? Get to understand their motivation a little bit. Yeah, one more example. One ball. One ball. Okay, very interesting. Wrong. Okay, so this is where we start, right? Because we want to start teaching. But we have to understand what we know about the science of teaching and learning if we really want to make it impactful and effective. So when I was writing this book, I wrote a whole chapter on teaching and learning, and I dug into all the research I could find, and I distilled it into 4 principles. This is what the research shows in terms of good teaching. And number 1, okay, I need to know where to start teaching. So I need to know what you already know about that. So why don't you show me what you can do? And now I'm going to get a sense of where to start. Wow, this kid can already, has good coordination, can toss a few balls. So I'm going to skip a few steps and get right into that. Versus, whoa, they don't even know how to hold a ball properly. Let's start with that. In fact, that is the first step in juggling, showing someone how to hold the ball. So arm placement. Never mind tossing, hold the ball, how to hold the ball in your hand. So number one, I want to see where should I start teaching. So show me what you can do or what you think you can do. Number two, you hit on the motivation. So why do you want to learn this? What's the reason or the incentive or the punishment for doing what I'm asking you to do? We jump into coaching and say, okay, everybody, we're doing 10 200s today. I don't want to do that, right? That hurts. That sucks. So we need to explain why. Okay, here's why we're going to do this today. Give them some ownership, help understand. Don't just assume they make the connections we make. We need to explain why we do these things and help understand why they would want to do it. Component skills. So I need to understand the pieces. So it's like a puzzle, right? And what's the first thing you do when you're trying to make a puzzle? So I give you a puzzle box. What do? Well, first of all, you open the box and then dump all the pieces, spread them on the table, you turn them over. Then before you start doing the puzzle, where do you put the puzzle box? Do you turn it upside down and put it out to the side? No, you put it up on the desk with the picture facing you. So you always see the final product. So you always see what we're trying to do. And so we need to show our athletes as much as possible. They need to always see, hey, eventually it's going to look like that. Eventually it's going to look like that. Eventually it's going to look like that. Because if we just turn the box, okay, we're going to start working on stuff, they don't see the end result. And then they get stuck in pieces. So they should always be able to see what that final product's supposed to look like. And then the last part is feedback. So there's a whole body of research on feedback and the science of feedback and when to give feedback and what type of feedback. And you could do a PhD on feedback. In fact, I have a buddy who just ended up doing that recently. And so what we do know is that this idea of deliberate practice, there's a certain kind of practice that is good practice, and it's essentially the things that, getting people to practice the things that are hard, that they don't necessarily like to do, which is counterintuitive, because I always use golf as an example. How many people are recreational golfers who like to go to the driving range? Yeah. So when you go to the driving range, most of us, right, we don't do deliberate practice. We think we're practicing, but we're not, because we'll take a bucket, say you get 100 balls and a bucket of balls. You'll use your favorite club, right? Like 80 of those balls are going to be your 5-wood, because, man, I love my 5-wood, and I hit that thing nice. So you're not getting any better. You're just getting older, right? So we should be using the club we're not good at for 80 of those balls, right? So understanding what do we need to practice, and then being strategic about the feedback I want to give them while they're practicing that. And I'm amazed at how many coaches, number one, go into a practice without a practice plan. They kind of, it's up here, I got it, right? Write it down, but then also, if you really want to be strategic and successful, be very specific about, okay, I have a list of drills or activities, but also, what are the words I want to use when I'm teaching that? So be consistent with especially if you have a staff. So if they're over here and they're getting a different language here and a different language there and a different language there, when we're working on this drill, I want everybody to use these 3 words with the kids, okay, or this word. And so they're getting the same language, and it forces you to think about what are the cues, and then you use those cues in games because they've heard it 1,000 times in practice, right? So being really strategic about the type of feedback you want to give. And one of my favorite examples of kind of putting this into action and creating the right kind of climate for learning and performance is with our women's national team coach, volleyball coach, Karch Karai. And this was a picture at the end of the World Championships in Italy a few years back. It was the 17 World Championships have been played up until that point in volleyball. The U.S. team had never won the World Championship. Always very good, but never won. And all of a sudden, this guy becomes head coach. 2 years later, his first World Championships with the team, and they win the World Championship, something no one had ever done. And just by chance, a week after that picture, I'm sitting in a classroom with him, and we're doing a workshop. And we talked about it after. He said, what happened? What was different? What changed? And he said, well, this is what changed. He said, when I took over the job, one of the first things I did was I read this book. And many of you have probably seen this book called Mindset. And it's Carol Dweck, who has nothing to do with sport or sports science. She's a psychologist at Stanford. And he said, I read this book and it got me thinking about what I saw at practices and our training environment. And he said, and this is a group, Karch in this picture here, this is a group, we have a study group with our US Olympic coaches that we've started a while ago. And he was in the first group. And this is some handwritten notes about his philosophy, his coaching philosophy. And I just circled at the top there. You can see he put job one, growth mindset, and then he also put mistakes, ugly, ... And so what happened was, when he took over, when he took over that program, he said, if you came to watch the women's national team practice at Pepperdine or wherever they happen to be practicing, you would see exactly what you'd expect to see from world-class athletes. You'd see a clean practice. Athletes looking like world-class athletes. Said, but we weren't getting better. We were practicing things we're really good at, and we weren't getting better. And part of that is, as a young kid, right? Think of our kids as they come up through the development system. Mistakes are ugly, right? You even get punished sometimes when you make mistakes. If you make them over and over again, we're going to swim all day, we're going to run, or we're going to do laps. In school, mistakes are bad. So they're enculturated with this idea that avoid mistakes, avoid mistakes, avoid mistakes. And so that we're programming them to be very narrow in how they develop their talent. And he said, I had to break that because we were stuck. And I read this book and it got me thinking about mistakes and ugly. And he said, I changed the environment from you're going to get punished if you make mistakes to you're going to get punished if you're not making mistakes. You have to be making mistakes to get better. And that's where that term practice ugly comes from. So parts of practice anyways are going to look ugly because we're trying things we're not really good at yet. And that's how we get better. And so it's going to look ugly. So say if you come watch a practice now, much of the practice you'd walk away scratching your head saying, that's the best team in the world? They look awful. Yeah, we're getting better. We're trying to do things that we can't do yet and get better at them. And the way I kind of think about it, with the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset and the application of sport, with a fixed mindset, you see that's that golfer out at the driving range. They're trying to prove their ability. So they're doing things they're really good at because it feels good. Intrinsically, it's motivating and you feel good about yourself, but you're not getting better. So you spend a lot of time trying to prove your ability. And what we want to do is create practice environments that are more kind of ugly in a sense, where the emphasis is on improving your ability. But I do think that there's a value in having part of your practice where they get to be kind of fixed mindset, let them practice stuff they're good at, because then they feel good about themselves, right? So, maybe we end practice with stuff they can already do. And so the last thing they remember when they leave practice is, yeah, I'm pretty good at this. This is fun, right? But there may be practices where I want them leaving confused and they need to be humbled because they think they're better than they are. So I want them walking away and saying, man, I'm not as good as I think I am. And so this is just a quote from Karch: you better be making mistakes in practice or you're not getting better. Becoming is better than being, that's also in line with that. This is actually a sheet of paper that I saw at back to school night for my 10-year-old when he was in grade 4. I'm sitting in the little chair and I'm always looking around the walls, and I see the teacher wrote this chart on the wall, and I said, wow, growth mindset, there it is, right? Putting it in, it's the principle, not the practice. So she put it in language for 10-year-olds. And it's funny, I went up to her after and I said, hey, where did you get that idea for that chart? That's pretty neat. And she said, oh, you got to read this book. It's called Mindset. I said, really? Interesting. Tell me more. But so she adapted it to 10-year-olds, right? Same principle. Now, what's a good practice look like? Well, continuing on this idea, teaching, climate, and a practice. I took this, there was a media report on this a while ago because Japan historically wins the Little League World Series for 12 and under kids, they do very, very well. And I was in Japan a couple times, and so I started to observe this and look at this, and the secret to their success in winning the World Championships for 12-year-olds is 10-hour practices. I'm not kidding, 10-hour practices, and I've seen this. How many people hold 10-hour water polo practices? Nobody's willing to admit it. Oh, geez, is that wrong? I shouldn't. 10-hour practice. But it's a full day. It's a Saturday. They make a full day out of it. Families bring meals. And so it's deeper than just a 10-hour practice. It's really a cultural experience in a sense. But I do see that we fall into this trap that we tend to think more is better. And if it's built into our mindset, right? If you're in the gym for an hour, I'm going to be in there for an hour and a half. If you're in the pool for 2, I'm going to be in there for 2.5. And more and more and more and more and more. And when we look at the research on practice design, we see that generally practices are not well designed. A lot of wasted time, a lot of inefficiency. So one of Coach Wooden's favorite quotes was, "Never mistake activity for achievement." And coaches are notorious for being time poor and busy. I don't have time. I'm so busy. Well, let's look at how you spend your time. Do you really need a 3-hour practice? Can you get it done in 90 if it's, well done? And an example of that is a few years ago, LSU football, Les Miles was national championship coach. He was fired partway through the season. And the head assistant was elevated to head coach. And the first thing he did, so not new schemes, new players, new offense, he said, "Guess what, boys? We're going to cut practice by 75%. That's all we're going to do." And they went on to win a bowl game, have a record season. He's now their head coach, permanent head coach. And so there's a lot of value in being more efficient in terms of how we design our practices. And this is what I've seen research on practice, 4 principles to having a great practice. And actually, this is a little interview with this guy here. He's the all-time winningest baseball coach, high school baseball coach in California. He's out in Fresno. And we were talking about it, and he nailed it. The research backs it up. He said, look at your practice, does every drill or activity have a purpose? So there's no filler. Well, we always start this way, or we always do this. Why is that on your practice plan? Okay, everything has to have a purpose. Variety. So again, that's for motivation and to keep kids engaged. Competition. If kids weren't coached, if you didn't show up to practice, what would kids do? They would get a ball, they'd make teams, and they'd play a game. And they'd keep score. That's what kids do. That's what adults do. We're competitive by nature. So can I make my drills competitive as much as possible, or some aspect of the practice? Make it matter. And then game speed. So even over speed and game speed. So if you're doing stuff like this is deliberate practice. And 75, 90 minutes, you're good. You don't need 3 hours. You don't need 4 hours. Now, of course, if you're building conditioning, there's different factors to consider there. So this is what a good practice looks like. But I also want us to be sensitive to what we know about the balance between deliberate practice and what we might call free play. So if we can err on the side of being too regimented in terms of all deliberate practice. So it's really good training, but I'm going to lose some kids because they're not ready for it, or they're not wired that way. And where's the fun in this? And where's the autonomy in this? So we want to be able to have within our practices, or across a week at least, some balance of deliberate practice, the hard training, with some free play. So is that letting the kids pick the warm-up? Is that letting a kid each week pick a drill? Is that letting the kids have some ownership over it? Or some when I coach soccer, the first 8 to 10 minutes was free play. Just because they're coming from school, they haven't seen their friends, been sitting down all day, go play. And as a parent watching that, what the heck's this? They're just playing. You're not even coaching. So just relax. They need to have some time to play, because that's why they're here, and then we'll do the training, okay? And then the last point on this, and I'll let you reflect on it. I came across this a little while ago, and it got me thinking about, again, practice design, how we engineer practices. And what's the best way to end a practice, right? Typically we end with conditioning, or a game, a scrimmage, right? Like there's but it's just because that's how we always do it, right? But why? What's the evidence that would support that that's a good way to end a practice? And I was reading a book, and I came across this research on something called strategic procrastination. And you can use that at work if you want next time, or if you're handing in a paper. And there's some good research behind this. When you leave things unfinished and come back to them, they're always more creative, a little bit stronger, a little bit quicker to pick up. And why would that be the case? There's a couple of reasons. One, our brains consume about 20% of our body's energy. They consume a lot of energy. And the brain strives for homeostasis, in a sense. It wants to be stable state, conserve energy. That's wired into our DNA. So the brain doesn't like open loops, likes to close loops, finish things. And so when you go to bed, there's a neat study with mice. When you go to bed and you have something in your head, you leave something unfinished, your brain doesn't leave it unfinished. So your brain is trying to close that loop all night. And that's why, usually the last thing you do before you go to sleep, and that's why they recommend not watching TV or reading the news before you go to bed, because your brain's going to be replaying that all night. There's a neat study with mice where they're trying to teach them how to run a maze, and then they put them to sleep before they mastered it, and they were able to see the electrical activity in the mice brain. And that same pattern that was being replayed in their brain when they're trying to learn it was replayed tens of thousands of times while they were sleeping. So you're learning while you're sleeping, if you're strategic about it. And then it struck me what Coach Wooden used to do. He once told me he often liked to introduce a new drill or a new activity at the end of a practice, but not finish it. And he found when he did that, when they came back to practice the next day and he started with that, they always picked it up really quick. But he didn't know why, and there's no research on it. And now we have research, a lot of things Wooden did, now we just have research to back up what he discovered on his own. And so it got me thinking. It's actually called the Zygarnik effect. And I've experimented with this on my own. Start designing a practice plan and leave it. Go for a walk, go work out, go do something else, come back to it. Your brain is still working on it. And you always come back with different ideas, a little bit more innovative, and you pick things up quicker. Maybe occasionally leave a practice so you finish a practice with some confusion. Don't let them master something so they walk away from practice a little confused. Maybe that's the norm anyways, right, with our practices. But you introduce something that they don't get to master, and so they get to kind of reflect on it. Their brain's still going to kind of be working on it while they walk away. So I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes on this one, and then the last 2 pieces are quicker. Think about learning, the type of climate you create, and what your practices look like in relation to these principles that we just talked about. I'll give you 3 minutes on that. Okay, the last 2 pieces are a little shorter, a little tighter. Okay, so we get to the end of the season, and I find this is a moment that a lot of coaches, unfortunately, kind of skip over. They jump into what's next, but there has to be some closure on your season, because it's a journey. You're taking a team on a journey, an emotional, physical journey, and you need to have some kind of closure there. And so I'm just going to share a few examples of what I've seen with what great coaches do in that moment. So this is one of the best high school basketball coaches we've ever had, a guy named Morgan Wooten. And this is a quote from him, just to reinforce that. A coach's job isn't done when the season ends, it just changes. So again, it's just a different coaching moment. It's not the end of that journey. It's just a different moment that requires a different kind of focus and different activity as a coach. And how do you know if you're doing a good job? So as a coach, one thing I've seen at all levels, we don't do a very good job of helping coaches get better. And whatever term you want to use, whether it's assessment or evaluation or ongoing development. This guy here was our Olympic diving coach for, I think, 3 Olympics, 12-time coach of the year. He's at Indiana University. And this is him reflecting 37 years of coaching, college coaching. Never once had anyone come and observe him coach or sit in on a meeting. And I see this at the university I work with. It's just something that gets overlooked and neglected. We just kind of move on to the next thing. We don't really pause and invest in making sense of what just happened before we start doing the next stuff. So it kind of gets to this idea of how do you know if you did a good job? So at the end of the season, okay, you look at your record, win, loss, but how do we know if we did a good job as a coach? And I think about all the different sources of information that we can pull on. We want to try and get information and feedback from as many different sources as possible, right? Why not ask officials? Why not ask opposing coaches? Hey, what was it like when you played our team? What did you notice? You get feedback from people who've been around you and seen you in your club and your team. And that's going to highlight what you need to get better at versus just you taking a stab at it or some kids doing a questionnaire. Is try and be as comprehensive as you can, but also being practical. And one thing I really have learned to encourage with coaches is we're good at identifying weaknesses and gaps. Oh, what do we need to get better at? But I've come to see the value more and more in starting with, hey, what are we really good at? Let's start there. What did we do well this year? What was your best day of coaching? What are we really doing great at right now? And there's some neat research and literature on that in the business world called strength, usually refers to as strength-based coaching or appreciative inquiry, AI. So there's a lot of stuff in the business world on that. And so I've been pushing coaches more and more. Before we do all the gap analysis and weaknesses, let's start with what are we doing well? And also it's more motivating, isn't it? That's more fun anyhow, yeah. And this is Augie Garrido, one of the best baseball coaches. He coached at Fullerton, won national championships, Fullerton in Texas. He passed away recently and actually played baseball at Fresno State, go way back. So one little activity I like to do with coaches, we do this with some of the Olympic coaches in our workshops. We'll take a half hour and we'll do this and then we'll debrief it. So this simple activity at the end of a season, but you could do this during the season, right? At the end of each month. Hey, what was your best day of coaching last month? Do it as a club, get together as coaches. Everybody share, what was your best day of coaching and why? And what you're doing is you're revealing what your strength, things that are intrinsically motivating, things you're good at, things that feel good. And then the next step is, let's have more days like that. So what do we need to do in our environment, in our club, to allow you to have more days like that, for you to be at your best? See how it's completely different than, hey, what do we need to work on? What are we bad at? Well, let's just have more great days. Let's build that kind of environment. And so we look at, how do we do? Now we need to bring closure for the athletes in our team. And most clubs and teams have banquets and give out awards, and that's great. But what about having some experience that really brings closure to this journey? And one of my favorite examples of that is this guy, Joe Ehrman, and he has, this is a nice book, Inside Out Coaching. He played in the NFL, and he is a high school coach now, a high school football coach. And what he does is at the end of every season with his high school kids, and it's called the Last Practice Ritual. And again, think of rituals and standards and things that exemplify your values. And this is what his last practice looks like. I'll just give you a moment to read that. So again, high school, 14 to 18-year-old kids, last practice. So we've been training, competing for 4 months, 6 months, and we need to kind of, it's like having a scar or a cut that never really heals, right? We need to bring some closure to that. So they practice, go in the locker room, change, shower, they walk out holding hands, seniors first. They do a tour of the campus and they stop at significant points, maybe a tree that was planted for 9/11, maybe a Hall of Fame, maybe a place where they used to run sprints. Like they stop and they kind of process and have a moment and talk about the significance of these places and these moments. They finish back at the field. Only the seniors are allowed on the field. All the other players surround the field. The seniors get a moment with the place where they bled, where they fought, maybe 4 years of, really influential. A lot happened on that field. And they do whatever they want. Some do sprints, some just sit, some take a piece of grass. Then they all come onto the field and they have what they call the final huddle. And so you see how that reinforces values and standards and culture, and that's really powerful for those kids who are coming back next year. And you also gave your seniors a chance to have some closure on that experience. And then we'll go do our banquet too. But little things like that make a big difference. And so we get to our banquet, and we have pretty standard, what I've seen, pretty standard way of doing this. But there's also some really innovative ways to do this. Basically anything you hand out at a banquet should be directly aligned with your core values and your team standards. So if you're just giving out most improved, most valuable, best offense, best defense, you're missing the boat. And I saw you gave out a lot of nice awards last night that kind of reinforce values and culture and tradition. Same thing with your programs. And these are just, again, it's not the practice, it's the principle. These are the few that I've seen that are kind of fun, like giving out an award for a nails award. The kid on our team was tough as nails, if that's really important for us, toughness. The glue award, the kid who really held our team together. But one of my favorites, probably my favorite that I've seen, I was at Michigan State doing an event, and they have a very storied hockey program, won multiple national championships, all-time winningest coach in college ice hockey. And I'm walking around the arena and looking at all the awards and things, and I looked in the trophy case and I saw this one award, and I stopped and I said, nah, what is that? And this is what it was, okay? Let's see here. It's called the Goofus Award. And it's right up there beside MVP, top scorer, best defense. So it's important for them, and there's some literature on that, but if joy and passion and fun is really part of our values and what we want to have in our team environment, I'm going to create an award for that. Remember, people do what you inspect, not what you expect. So I need to, because your banquet is another opportunity to reinforce and teach your core values, not just hand out a bunch of awards. So I love this award, the Goofus Award, and it's given out every year for the person who's the biggest jokester on the team, right? Why not? If we value that, then let's have an award for that. So I'll give you 2 minutes on this one, then we'll wrap it up. Think about how you end your season. What kind of rituals and things do you do that are impactful at the end of a season? Or could you do? I'll give you 2 minutes on that one. You've been great. You've been very patient, and I know we're kind of moving a little quicker. It's funny, I always get into this situation when I do talks. It seems to have lots I want to share. I did an event in Portugal a few years ago, and it was being translated, and the translator told me, he came and saw me afterwards, and he was sweating. He said, man, trying to translate for you is like driving a standard. You started off in first gear, then second, and by the end you're in fifth gear, and I was going as fast as I could to keep up. So let's finish this up. And again, we're just kind of stimulating conversation. We're just starting it here. We're not really finishing it. So we get to the end of the season. We have some closure. Now we can breathe. It's an off season, right? And what do good coaches do in the off season to help get better? What's that? Exactly. There is no off season. A lot of coaches have said that. Said, yeah, well, that 5-minute off season was fun. Now that's all right. So, but what I see is when I just put this picture up a little while ago when I started doing events, and one thing we've overlooked historically with coaching is wellness, coach wellness. So we have all these resources. In fact, the NCAA has a huge resource center for athlete wellness. Nothing for coaches, nothing. In fact, I had a conversation with a conference commissioner recently, and he said, you know what? Used to just be football, basketball, but pretty much every sport, I can guarantee you within 2 years of hiring a head coach, they're either going to be on anti-anxiety medication, sleeping pills, broken relationship, on and on. I said, wow, sign me up. Sounds like a great job, right? but we don't do anything for our coaches. So we need to be proactive in helping our coaches stay in the game, right? And so even though you're around people all the time, you're alone. Because you're supposed to be the one in charge. You're supposed to have it in control. You're supposed to know the answers. So you're around people all the time, but you're very isolated. And that's something we need to do better at in terms of organizations and clubs. And it's really hard. And I don't want to diminish what you're trying to do. And here's Jose Mourinho, who's not coaching anymore. He has an extended off season right now. But the idea, there's some neat research on this too. And you're trying to do things that are really hard emotionally and physically. It's draining, right? And I use that analogy of the fuel tank. So all day, all season, you're filling other people's tanks, right? And the Positive Coaching Alliance talks a lot about fueling your tank. And so who's fueling your tank? So you got to be proactive in that. And I like this example here. Again, we surround all these resources around the athlete to help them stay well and fresh and prepared, but who's helping us? Who's in our support network? So we got to be proactive in that. And I saw this a while back in Harvard Business Review. They were looking at what we know about what really successful people do. And one of the key things they do is they're very selfish. And it's very much selfish is generally associated with being a negative attribute. Stop being so selfish. It's not about you. Well, it is about you at some point, and you have to be selfish to be able to serve others. Because if you're sick and not well and burned out, you're no good to anybody else. So what they found in this study is the most successful people start their day on offense. That they use this term, start your day on offense. So instead of, like most of us, we get up and we start our day, we're on defense right away. Check emails, check texts, get the kids ready for school. We're serving other people. We're emptying our tank from the moment we get up. But really successful people take some time, whether it's 30 minutes, 15, whatever it is, to fuel their tank. So top up your tank before you start fueling other people's tanks. And it hit me when you fly, they always give you that safety demonstration, right? And they always tell you, before you put on anybody else's mask, make sure you put on your own. And it's that idea of you have to be well before you can serve other people. So you have to be selfish as a coach a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, you need to do that. And then you want to surround yourself with the right kind of people. And there's some neat research now on social behavior and disease. And we actually think of obesity as a social epidemic, for example, like you catch obesity. And there's some neat research that shows for, every obese friend you have in your close circle, your likelihood of also becoming obese goes up by about 20%. So you become your environment, right? So surround yourself with the right kind of people that are filling your tank, not draining it all day. And these are just some good books that I've come across, coaches have shared with me and athletes, and just as reminders of the kind of person I want to be, but also the kind of people I want to surround myself with. I want energy givers, not energy suckers, right? And these are some good reminders of that. And I'm starting to see this more and more with professional teams and college teams, where there's kind of a tendency to hire young coaches, people who haven't coached before, and so to help them stay in the game, in a sense, these organizations are hiring coaches for their coaches. So instead of, at the end of the season, let's send them on a study tour, they can go visit somebody else. No, let's hire someone to fill their tank all the time, and they're going to sit right beside them. They're going to be at practice. They're going to be with them all the time. And one of my favorite examples of that is Ron Adams. You'll see that picture in the center. If you ever see a Golden State Warriors game, you'll always see that picture. You're going to see Steve Kerr, the head coach, and right beside him, a guy named Ron Adams. And Ron Adams is in his 70s. He used to coach at Fresno State, actually. And he could be a head coach in his own right, but he's made a career as an energy giver, basically an assistant coach. And these are just some examples. When Brad Stevens went from college to the Celtics, he said, I want Ron Adams sitting beside me. They hired him away from Chicago, where he was sitting beside Thibodeau, the head coach there. And then when Kerr got the job, they said, I want Ron Adams sitting beside me on the bench. And he's an energy giver. And there was a neat story in the New York Times about this a little while ago. And this is a quote from Steve Kerr talking about the role that Ron Adams plays in helping him become a better coach. So although in the off season, we, traditionally we'll try and kind of catch up and catch our breath and recharge in the off season when we can, why not build that into your environment so that it's like plugging your phone in. So essentially you have an outlet beside you all the time. You're always able to kind of plug in. So just a reminder to surround yourself with the right kind of people that are building you up and fueling your tank. And then we finish with this. So the best coaches are never done. And I see this across disciplines. The best people always kind of take this approach that it's what you learn after you know it all that matters most. And I remember hearing an interview with a Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he was in his 80s, and they had all kinds of screenplays and books, and they said, so what was your greatest book? And without hesitation, he said, my next one. And it's that mindset that you're never done. You're always a work in progress, right? So that's humility. So I can learn from anyone and everyone, and every moment is a learning opportunity. So what are some things great coaches do to stay fresh and keep learning? There's 3 things I've seen to be very effective: study topics, study coaches, or collaborative learning, social learning. I just give book club as an example. And this is a picture here, a guy named Jamie Staff. He's a world champion cyclist. Now he's our US BMX coach. And he was in a cohort that we did with learning. And again, just reinforcing that coaching is very isolating, and you need to be proactive and surround yourself with ways to keep getting better and fueling your tank. So a quick example here. Coach Wooden did this at the end of every season, 40 years of coaching. He would do a study. He would pick a topic that he wanted to get better at, and he'd essentially do a little thesis on it, a little research experiment. And it's funny because that's going back 50 years. And Bill Belichick does the same thing with his staff, but a little differently. At the end of every season, and you wonder why they're in the Super Bowl every year, right? well, Tom Brady doesn't hurt having Tom Brady on your team, but every year he requires at the end of the season with his staff, huge staff, right? They get homework. Every one of them has to go and learn one new thing and bring it back when we get together in 2 weeks. So think about it. If everyone is learning something new all the time and we're pooling that, you're always getting better. You're always getting better. So he requires it. The other thing that I've seen a lot of coaches do is they study coaches. They go and study other coaches. And one of my favorite examples of that is this guy, Cameron McCormick, who's Jordan Spieth's coach. And I've been on a few study tours with him. And what he did, he inherited Jordan Spieth. So he was a former golfer. He's in Dallas, and parents show up to his club with this 15-year-old kid, and he wants to take golf lessons. And he learned pretty quickly, because he had never really coached before. And he saw after a year or so, he said, this kid's different than the other kids. And he realized, I need to keep learning to get better as a coach, or I'm going to have to pass him off to somebody else. So he got, Golf Digest publishes a list of the top 75 or 100 coaches, golf instructors every year. He got the list, and he wrote a letter, same letter, to every coach on that list. He didn't know them. He said, hi, I'm Cameron McCormick. I'm a golf coach. Can I come watch you coach? That's it. And about 25 said, sure. But luckily, the #1 person on the list said, yeah, come on out. And that was Tiger Woods' coach at the time, a guy named Butch Harmon. And so no one mandated that he do that. It wasn't part of a PGA certification. He took the initiative to go out and see what other people are doing and get better. And then the last thing here is book clubs. So coaches like to read, but I also have found that coaches are notorious book starters, right? We start a lot of books. Oh, look at my bookshelf. Yeah, I've read 10 pages of every one of those, right? So, because your job's never done. And so how do you make time for that, right? And it's hard when you're doing it by yourself. So we start, one day, my daughter, I think she was 12 at the time, she had her phone on the counter, and I just was looking at it, and it had on the phone the Harry Potter book club. And it just, like a light bulb went off. It said, coaches are struggling to make time and persist and keep up with their reading, but they like to read. And there's book clubs for everything else. Why don't we have book clubs for coaches? Make it social and accountable, and we share. And then you know what? You don't have to read the whole book, because collectively we're going to read the whole book and then share, right? You know? And so we started to do this, and actually had for a little while an international coaching book club with about 15 coaches, national team coaches, and we get together once a month on Skype. And these are just some that I've read recently that I found really, really fun. But what struck me, okay, when we tried this the first time, we thought, okay, we're all going to pick a book and we're all going to read it. Well, then you get together a month later and it's, oh, I didn't get to, oh, I started it. Oh, this came up, right? And then I realized not everyone has to read the whole book, but one person has to read the book. So you delegate, say this month it's Wade's turn, okay, this is the book we're going to do. You read as much as you can, you go get it, but Wade's going to promise he's going to read the whole book. And we rotate through that. So you're reading one whole book, basically a year, let's say if you had 12 people. And what I found is when we had the conversations, it didn't matter if you hadn't read the book, because one person can lead the discussion and provoke and stimulate reflection on it. And it really was powerful. So the last handout, and you'll leave with this, you have a list of principles. And when I finished the book, it took 3 years and it's still really not finished, but I thought, I wonder if I could put all the principles that I picked up on one page. And this was my attempt to do that. So I organized the principles by moments, by seasons. And what I'd encourage you to do before you leave today, at noon, is kind of take a moment and look down there and maybe put some check marks beside principles that you feel are strengths. So, yeah, I'm pretty good at that. Yeah, we do that. And maybe a couple that either you don't know what they are or you need to get better at, put an X. And then see if you can find somebody walking around who has a check mark beside one of your X's. Get their name, get their number, and go for coffee, call them up sometime. And when we do this in the extended workshops, we'll do it in the room. So you'll make connections right here in the room. And what it does is it makes learning social, but it also reinforces that the answers are in the room. It's local wisdom. You don't need flying Wade Gilbert in to do this stuff. I guarantee you there's a check mark beside every one of those collectively in the room. We could cover every one. So in your club, it's a fun activity to do in your club or with people in your region, and connect and network and share local wisdom. So I'll leave you with that. And I really appreciate your time and your patience today. And I'm looking forward to watching you all coach someday. Thanks.